This is Raina Campbell, your Chief Dream Driver, and welcome to the No Parking Podcast, where through conversations and discussions with creators like yourself, we'll find interesting approaches to help you take your dreams out of park, put them in drive, and ride towards success. Hey Dream Drivers, welcome to episode 80 of the Dreams and Drive podcast. And today we are going to be speaking with tech entrepreneur and journalist Wize, who is also the creative director and founder of Indie Creative Network, an on-demand media production and distribution company. And on this episode, we're going to talk about how to stay in drive. So, how to successfully launch and market your dream. So if you have an idea and you see a need and you are trying to figure out, all right, I see a need. How do I actually put this need into fruition and create something that people can benefit from and that provides value to a community? This episode is for you. Wize just talks about a lot of things that he learned while launching Indie Creative Network and some of the things that he thinks creators really need to focus on, such as data, analytics, all that good stuff. Some of the other things that we discuss in this episode are the power of the Google University, the importance of researching, what happened when Wize went back to Barbados to live for a year. He talks about the joys of fatherhood. He is a proud father, and he talks about his daughter, Brianna, and it's just so inspiring and so motivating to hear when he speaks about her. We also talk about tips that you can use when creating your own network, the importance of SEO, and marketing to your audience, hashtags, monetizing, all of that. This episode is going to give you a good look inside what happens when you're actually building a company from the ground up. So I hope that you guys enjoy that. And you also just get to hear Wize's story as well. So before we get into the episode, remember, if you want today's show notes, just go to dreamsanddrive.com and click on episode 80. Make sure that you are also following us on social. We are at Dreams and Drive across the board, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can also use the hashtag Dreams and Drive when listening. I love going in, searching the hashtag, seeing what people are saying, tweeting back, retweeting stuff. So all the good stuff that Wize talks about in this episode, make sure you tweet about it, tell a friend about it. Dreams and Drive is growing, and each week we're just getting bigger and bigger, and it's because of you. You're listening, you're enjoying the content, and you're sharing it with others. So keep on doing that, because that's what's going to help us dream drivers get to know about more dream drivers and just build this whole movement. So thank you. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. It's going to be a treat. All right, let's get to it. Hi, Wize. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dreams and Drive.
Thank you so much for having me. How you doing today?
I am doing good. For anyone who's on the East Coast, the Northeast especially, today has been a blizzard. So we are just trying to shovel our way out of all this snow. At first, I thought it was going to be cool to have a blizzard, a snow day off from work. And now I'm just like, oh no.
Yeah, the shoveling aspect is not the best part, but it does look kind of good though.
I don't know. You're in Brooklyn, or you're in New York, or where you're?
Brooklyn.
Okay.
Brooklyn.
I just assume Brooklyn because most Caribbean people live in Brooklyn. I was definitely stereotyping you just now.
You can stereotype even further, because I actually do live in Flatbush, which is like the place for West Indians. So yeah. But
let's get into the interview, Wize. You know that I love to start all our interviews with the same question. So tell me, what inspired you as a child? So if I had to say who was the 8-year-old, 9-year-old Wize, what would you tell me?
I don't know. I was inspired a lot with my mom. Outside of that, I don't really have too many inspirations. She's more than enough. Honestly, my mom came here in the early 80s. Mid 80s. I was born shortly afterwards. And to see her go from, being like a nanny for people all the way to working in corporate America and still kind of working there and raising 2 kids and having to take care of our family and, still ushering in like our family members from Barbados, it was very inspiring.
What do you think impressed you the most about her doing that as a young child? You know what I mean? Because I feel like as a kid, the word, we think of inspiration is different than we think of it now. Like now we're able to reflect on it. But as a kid, what do you think was that thing that made you say, wow?
I think it's the amount of people that I believe relied on her. Like her phone was always blinging. Like she was always doing something for somebody. We're always going here, there, and everywhere. Trying to provide the resources that we had to share it out to everyone else. And I think not only that inspired me, but it also kind of gave me a little bit of guidance to who I wanted to be as an adult.
So what kind of, I guess, back then, what was that thing that you said you wanted to be when you grew older?
Oh man. Oh man. So I wanted to be, actually, I love driving. Well, I loved driving. So, I wanted to be an MTA bus driver. I thought that driving a bus was so much fun.
It's funny. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a cashier. And my mom used to get so mad at me because, when you go to family functions and everyone's saying, so Marina, what you want to do when you grow up? And I would say, I want to be a cashier. Like, she'd be like, what? Stop telling people that. And I was fascinated with getting, like people checking you out at the grocery store and all that stuff. And I remember begging my mother for like the Barbie cash register and the Toys R Us book. And she never got it for me because I think she thought I would legit really want to be a cashier when I grew up. So Caribbean parents. Only thing I got was books.
Exactly. I know I told my mom that, and she blacked, and then eventually she got over it. I never did become an MTA bus driver. But I did become a cashier for a little while. I liked it for a while. It was pretty cool.
Where did you work?
Oh my God, I worked as a cashier at ShopRite. I worked as a cashier at this place down south called Harris Teeter. I worked at Dunkin' Donuts, Baskin Robbins. I worked a lot of places. That's another podcast. That's another podcast by itself.
The closest I ever got to being a cashier was working at the bowling alley. So there was like this local bowling alley, and I used to get to like punch people in if they got specials, like Saturday night specials. So that was the closest I ever got. But then they stopped letting me handle money because they said I was underage or whatever. So I got punished to being the shoe return girl, which was so disgusting. But hey, you gotta hustle as a 16-year-old,
Oh, definitely.
So you went to Johnson and Wales and got your degree in website management and internet commerce. What is that? Like, I never heard of. I mean, I know what it is to manage a website, but what inspired you to study that in college?
So I went to high school, just to put the framework on this story. I went to high school in North Carolina, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So being first generation, now living in North Carolina, I'm trying to find myself or what I liked. It was pretty difficult. But maybe my sophomore year of high school, I met this teacher named Ms. Worley, and she was teaching us how to build websites. From scratch, like using Notepad and coding the stuff together. And I really kind of latched onto that. So sophomore year, junior year, senior year, I stuck with it. And I asked her, what were some degrees that she thought would actually fit alongside what I wanted to do. And the two she gave me was, computer science, the generic one. And then she said, well, you can just look at other colleges. And a friend of mine went to school at Johnson and Wales University. So I saw a degree that kind of matched up with what I wanted to do, and website management, internet commerce.
What do you think were the biggest things you learned about the industry studying? Because I feel like sometimes I wonder, like, what did I learn in college? So I studied sociology. So I feel like the biggest thing I really took away from college was that whole researching and really learning how to write and just understand how societies function. But what do you think was your biggest takeaway?
Honestly, and this is not a dig at any college or university, but honestly, I didn't feel like I learned a lot from college. I learned the bare basics of what I needed to know so that if I Googled what I wanted, I could understand the terminology used. But that was just about it.
I feel you in that. I'm like, I went to Princeton. Like, what did I really learn? Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's, I spent a lot of money, and a lot of people spend a lot of money to go to college, and not saying it's not a good investment, because a lot of people do look at you a different way if you have a degree. But for the amount of money I spent to still have to, go to Google University for things, especially coming right out of college, was not something that I thought I'd have to do.
Listen, Google University is underrated. Underrated. Like there should be a degree for like Google University, literally. Because when I'm at work, I probably shouldn't be saying this online. If any of my coworkers listen to Dreams and Drive, but literally you can get stuck in a Google like black hole, but come out learning so much more than you would ever have known if you hadn't got stuck in the black hole. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Google and YouTube specifically, to me, are like trade schools. If you need to learn anything specifically, you can Google it, and then you can watch videos to supplement what you've what you learned and read, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, that's why I think, you may know this too. A lot of people send me emails, or even in person may ask me things. And my first reaction sometimes is like, did you try to Google this? Like, you know what I mean? I feel like a lot of people, especially people who want to become entrepreneurs, who want to become, creative entrepreneurs, lifestyle entrepreneurs, I feel like there's the people who really want it, and then there's the people who really want to learn it for themselves. And then there's the people who really want to have someone teach them, and they're more on the lazy side. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Which category did you fall in as you were really developing like who you were as a person and what you wanted to create, the type of business that you wanted to build?
I was a get it done type person. I have and this might be the West Indian as me as well, but I have a hard time asking people for things. So if I don't know it, I'm going to Google it. I'm going to YouTube it. I'm going to, try and work my resources as much as possible to find out what it is I'm looking for. And then maybe I'll ask somebody, for help, because I just feel like there are so many resources online. There's so many resources now, whether it's online, whether it's, my God, you can open a book sometimes and find stuff, for me to ask a question, it's one of my weak, it's like the double-edged sword, weak spot and strength.
And I think there's a joy, and there's, what's the word that I'm looking for? There's something great that can come out of just exploring and trying to figure out for yourself. Like I tell everyone this a lot of times. I get people who ask me, how do you start a blog? And it's like, I could tell you how to start a blog, or I could tell you how to get started on figuring out how to start a blog. Because if I hadn't had spent a year basically messing up with building my first website, I don't think I would have understood websites the way that I understand them now. I think it's different when you work with a designer and they do it for you, but there's benefit in trying to just figure it out for yourself on the back end, because there's so much more stuff that you understand versus if you had just outsourced it. So I really think like you should at least, not saying you should do it and you should make the final product, but at least try to get a background of what it is that you're trying to build before you just outsource it to somebody,
Absolutely. A little bit of, being able to understand, at least that base level of, to have the conversation, to have like a knowledgeable conversation with who your designer possibly, just to say, I want my site to be SEO friendly. You may not even know what that terminology means if you didn't bother to Google anything about websites or try and do it first. There's a lot of, there's a lot to say about someone who has like that drive to actually go and look for stuff first and, attempt to be knowledgeable or something. It's a lot for me when I find out that someone tried before they came to me, because that means to me that you actually do want to learn.
Definitely. And that also helps you know what kind of student they'll be if you do work with them, or what kind of client they'll be if you do work with them. But let's get back to the story, because I kind of got a little sidetracked for a little bit. So you graduated from Johnson & Wales in 2010, and then you went back to Barbados. Why? Yes. And what did you do?
So again, being first generation, I had traveled between the ages of 13 and at that point I was 21 going on 22. I had traveled a lot. I had lived in a bunch of different places. I had experienced a lot of different cultures in America, and I didn't feel comfortable not knowing my own. Like living in Brooklyn, living in Flatbush, you get the opportunity to truly, learn about West Indian culture in its entirety. But you don't necessarily get a chance to learn as much about your own outside of the experiences that your family and, some of their close friends could provide for you. So thankfully, I have maybe 75 to 85% of my family still lives in Barbados. So I took an internship down there, my final internship to graduate, took the internship at a company called Virgo Communications, a digital agency. I got the job, I got the internship, then I got the job, and I lived and worked there for just about a year, and it was amazing.
How was working in Barbados or just living in Barbados different from the U.S.?
Oh my God. Oh man. There are subtle differences, and then there are like major differences. So obviously, seasons are just thrown away. Like it's either sunny.
It's just happiness all year long.
Yeah, there's a lot more culture. It's very you kind of coming from America or whatever. It's very different to see 95% Black people all the time, to see the prime minister Black, to see the newscasters Black, every person you go into to the store, Black, like it's all Black, everything for real. Like, it was different completely, Mm-hmm. Working was also different because I had come from, just being in New York, the culture of working at this super fast pace is just something that people do. Whereas it was a lot more relaxed at the company I was working at. And that, there was a lot of funny enough, there were a lot of cultural issues that I had to deal with, like there were things that I just didn't know, communication. Like I'm very much so an introvert. So, I'd come in, maybe I say hi, maybe I don't say hi. I'm at my desk the entire day, drink my coffee, go home. I remember one of the employees who was a little older, mm-hmm. and she had lived outside the U.S. as well. So she pulled me aside and said, hey, I just wanted to let you know that sometimes, you should just, say hi to people and stuff like that because they may think you don't like them. And I'm like, oh, no, I just came into the job and leave. But it was much more of a family agency than it's a digital agency here and this is what we do and we just work here and go home. It was much more family environment.
Did people in Barbados or entrepreneurs in Barbados or working at a business in Barbados, was there a different shift in how they actually did business, or was it kind of the same as in the U.S.?
You mean as from an entrepreneur standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, you were working at an agency, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, was their approach to business different?
I'm not sure if I can answer that,
Because let me give you an example. When I was interviewing episode 32 guests, Jeff and Kalisa Martin of the Runaway Experience, they were talking about when they moved to Jamaica, they realized that everyone kind of did things on a different time, right? So they were so used to being in New York. If you say that, all right, I need this by Friday, they can get it by Friday. But whereas when they're working with people in Jamaica, it's like, if you say I need it by Friday, you might not get it till 2 weeks from Friday. So It was just a different pace, a different life. People were more lax. They left their business at the office, and then after work was, to enjoy life and to do other things beyond business. I guess I'm just trying to get from you, like, what was that whole atmosphere being a working man in Barbados like?
Yeah, no, it definitely was. Okay, so I definitely understand now. It was different. So, couple of stories. First one, when I want to say maybe like a month or two into me actually getting the job now, my creative director, she pulled me aside and she said, hey, sometimes people may not understand why you come in at 8, which was my time to come in, and leave at 4 on the dot. She was saying that, I know personally that you work really hard and, you're getting your stuff done. Your emails aren't like backed up and stuff like that. But some of your other coworkers may not understand that because they work at a different pace than you. And I was like, okay, that's cool. But y'all pay me for 8 to 4. I can come in at 8:30 and leave at 4:30, but I have my little set hours and this is what I want to do. And I said, plus also, sometimes I would log on from home because I was accustomed to telecommuting even back in 2010. Mm-hmm. I was accustomed to telecommuting anyway. So I'm like, well, I could just log on to the server from my house and I could get whatever additional work done as as well. So that was a little bit different. When I was sick, crazy enough, if you're sick in Barbados, you're not using any of your paid days off or anything like that. You're just sick. So you're home for that day. I used to tell my boss, hey, I'm not feeling well, but I can work from home though, because me traveling outside, I might get more sick, blah, blah, blah. She was like, no, if you're sick, just stay home. Don't worry about people in telecommunity. Don't log on. Just stay home and relax. I'm like, what? Even now in 2016, back in 2016 when I was working for somebody, if I needed to telecommute or if I was sick, my boss would be like, so can you log on or are you just like sick? I'm like, okay, I'm sick, so maybe I won't log on today.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that whole idea of like trying to do everything, like feeling bad for being sick when you got a sick day. It's like, all right, I'll be on email though if you really need me. So what was your dream at this point in time? So this is 2010, 2011. What did Wize want to do with his life now?
Oh my gosh. I wanted to eventually be able to just have clients and build websites for them. I had the skill sets. I actually started a company called 360 Studios with my friend Sharice, who's from the Virgin Islands, ended up moving to Florida, and we would like get clients and build websites for them, or like create like design UI stuff for them, and that was fun. But I don't know, like it became difficult because at the time, not everyone was so accustomed to people working remote, so they would want to see us. And I'm like, well, I'm not buying a $400 flight to Florida to see you. So if we can't do this on Skype, I don't know how we can get this done.
Okay, so that means, all right, so you wanted to have your own agency doing websites remotely. You moved back to New York. What was that plane like? What was that the flight back to New York like for you?
It was, I don't know, I had a lot of mixed emotions. I really, really missed New York because a lot of my immediate family lives in New York or lives in the United States. But I also really, really missed the Barbados. That 4.5 hour flight back to New York, I was just so torn. I mean, even now, 7 years later, I'm still kind of torn. Like, my God, I miss Barbados every day. But I knew that for me, there were things I needed to accomplish that I could not accomplish. Shout out to Sally Mae. Could not accomplish with Sally Mae asking me for money and making, basically, if anyone knows this, it's 2-for-1 Bayesian to US dollar or 50 cents on the dollar. So I was making a lot of money in Barbados, but really, and that's being poor, having to send money back to pay for my school loans.
What did you want to accomplish at this point?
At this point, I knew that I had the talent. I knew that I had a lot more resources than I did when I left. So I wanted to freelance. So for the entirety of 2011, I freelanced everywhere.
Back in New York?
Back in New York now, yes.
All right. So you were freelancing as a web designer?
Yes, web designer, web developer. I mean, I took a lot of like just computer tech jobs in general. I worked at least 10 different places in 2011.
What was your highest paying gig and how did you get it?
My highest paying gig, I was working at this newspaper that at the time was the only iPad. It was an iPad only news or an iOS only newspaper called The Daily, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I was making bi-weekly, I was getting like $1,600 mm-hmm. and I was like flat, like tax-free not tax-free, 1099, which messed me up at the end of the year, but $1,600 just to kind of like work on their UI. So they would have people like write stories, their reporters would write stories, and then we would kind of fit it into the platform, whereas it looked appropriate on the iPhone and iPad, regardless of whether it was vertical or horizontal.
So how did you get that? Did you know people who worked at that business, or was it just kind of something you applied for?
No, I was working at this I was getting my freelance gigs through this temp agency, and I was working originally at another digital agency, and they said, hey, I have a better paying gig at this newspaper if you want it. And I was kind of getting bored at at the digital agency. So I switched over to working at the Daily, and I had so much more fun. So much more. It just was, the only weird part was that it was from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. working from Thursday to Tuesday.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was really weird. My social life went to trash. Like, it was a lot.
But you were only doing it for within like this year, right? So this was 2011 or 2012?
2011. So this was, I probably did that from about, I'd say June to maybe like May to November.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I went looking for a different job.
All right. So this point, maybe tell me if I'm rushing along things here. You also you said you had your only kid, right?
Yes.
During this time?
Yeah, this is 2012. This is 2012.
You say only as if you're never going to have another kid again.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's been 5 years now, but I had my only child in 2012. Her name is Brianna. I love her so much. Mm-hmm. So I guess to go back just briefly, 2011 going to 2012, I knew that Brie was already coming. So mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, well, let's find a more stable situation. Freelance is cool, but if one day they tell me that they don't need me no more, I don't want to have to go running around for a new job. So let's get a full-time job. So I started working at another digital agency, but this time in the city. I'm not sure if I even want to say their name.
You don't have to say their name. Digital agency XXX.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not let's just call it digital agency, because there might be one called XXX and they'll come suing us. All right.
But yeah, I was working at the digital agency, and that was really, really fun. I got to go back to, I got to shift my job a little bit more. So at this point, I had done a lot of web stuff, but I wanted to kind of get into email campaigns because that's kind of where the world was going in 2012. So I did a lot of email campaigns for Disney and Coca-Cola, and that was really fun. I got to help them sell their credit cards. That was cool. Bree was born in April of that year. It was the highlight of my life even to this day. Mm-hmm. And then fast forwarding to September, they wanted to move to San Francisco, and I said no. And that's when my entrepreneur mindset restarted again.
So they wanted you to move with them?
Yeah, they were moving to San Francisco to kind of merge their two offices. Mm-hmm. And I'd only been back in New York for two years at that point, or not even the full 2 years. And I just had Brianna. My family was here. I had no family on the West Coast. I was just like, no, this is not going to work.
So, was there any part of you that said maybe it could work, or was it all just like, nah? No.
No. Honestly, I didn't want to leave New York. Mm-hmm. There was of course it could have worked. Like I would have loved. To this day, I haven't been to San Francisco. I would have loved to be out west. I'm actually planning a trip to go out west soon. Mm-hmm. But where I was at that time period, I was tired of moving around. So I was 25 at that point. Mm-hmm. I had lived in 4 different states. I had lived in, there wasn't a time period that I hadn't been in a new house every year since I was 13. Like that was a lot.
Wow.
So I really wanted to, let the cement solidify a little bit. Oh my gosh.
So last night I watched the new Chance the Rapper interview with Complex Magazine, because he was the March cover, and it was really focused on him being the world's best dad. So this question is kind of inspired from that interview, because they literally, I don't know if that's his whole PR thing now, where he's really spinning him as fatherhood and how it shaped him. But do you think, you had your daughter and, you could have moved to San Francisco, but you didn't because of what you said before. Was there any other way that fatherhood affected you and really inspired that desire to, build something that lasted and left a legacy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Growing up in New York, growing up around my family, was a huge inspiration for me. Not to even remotely go off topic, but I live in a house, like a full house with like 4 floors, and every floor has a family. It's a different family within my family tree, and having my daughter have that same experience that I had was really important. Growing a business or growing something that I could pass on to her was also equally important, because I know that my parents didn't come here for no reason. They came here for me to be successful, for me to have different opportunities than they did. And me bouncing around, the country, not being able to have like solid roots anywhere, not being able to have solid friendships that could span time. It was difficult. I didn't want that she'd be 4 years old. And I don't really have too many friends that have kids that I've known for a long time. That I didn't want her to go through that.
Was your family supportive of you and your entrepreneurial desires?
Yeah, absolutely. My biggest support is my mom. To this day, sometimes like she's like my silent investor when my funds aren't through. I'm like, hey, do you have like a little bit of extra money? Because we got to do this for the business. Because I say we, because this business is a family business, and no matter where it goes, will always be within the family, no matter what.
All right, so let's talk about the business. So what did you end up creating, or what was the business that you ended up launching?
Yeah. So I ended up launching Indie Creative Network. And Indie Creative Network is an on-demand platform for the Black and Brown influencers, or to elevate Black and Brown people in the world. The company itself didn't start out in that sense. It started out as a podcast network, because that was what I was involved in at the time. I had a podcast that I brought over from a live show in 2015, that I was like, okay, well, this is really cool. But I realized that there were a lot of pitfalls to podcasting at the time. Like, it was not as popular. Even though podcasting had been out since 2005, it wasn't really popular in the Black community until late 2015, going into 2016.
Really? Like, I feel like, because I used to, sorry for interrupting your story, because I don't really know, because I launched Dreams and Drive January 1st, 2016. And to be honest, I really hadn't listened to a lot of, podcasts by people of color. Like, the podcast that I first listened to, this is so random. It was this podcast called Loveumentary. And basically it was by this guy named Nate. And he toured the world, or toured the country interviewing couples about how they fell in love. And I was obsessed with this podcast, but even to me, I never really saw it as a podcast. I just saw it as a blog post that had a SoundCloud clip in it that I could listen to. So I hadn't really even, maybe until I was doing my research for Dreams and Drive in late 2015, even started realizing the whole concept of what a podcast was. Like, I had known that you could do audio, but I hadn't really saw it as a podcast. All right, back to your story.
No, a lot of people feel the same way. Like, when I had after Bree was born, about a year later, I started a show called the Encore Radio Show. Right, the Encore Radio Show. When I first started it, people would always ask me, hey, is this live or is this pre-recorded? If it was pre-recorded, they would not want to come on the show, because they hated pre-recorded shows. They really wanted it to be live to get the audience right now, because everything was radio, online radio. That's all people were focused on. So even when I shifted over to a podcast in 2015, people always ask, oh yeah, what's the live link? And I'm like, oh, there is no live link. And they're like, oh, well, all right, I guess, because they had already known me for 2 years at that point. So it was a little bit different. But yeah, podcasting was fun for me. And I thought that there were some deficiencies in the podcast game. For one, if someone Googled, Black podcast in 2015, they probably wouldn't find anything. If someone Googled hip hop podcast because they wanted to get an interview, they'd get like the Combat Jack show, shout out to Combat Jack, And I don't even know if there were any other hip hop podcasts or Black hip hop podcasts at the time, So I said, all right, well, for one, I know with my degree in website management and internet commerce, I definitely could help build a platform where people who had podcasts, people could be able to search, would be able to search for them. That's the first thing. So I reached out to a couple of people, who I knew had podcasts, in the country, and shows that I liked, shows that I admired, so on and so forth. And a couple people came on originally. Shout out to Jay Good, shout out to Den, shout out to Carry On Friends. A couple people came on early, and that provided me with like this boost and this idea and more like vision as to what were some of the deficiencies that were in the podcast game and how I could address them.
What did they want? Like, what did the people who were coming on, what were the things that they really needed from your network?
To this day, a lot of the answers and questions are still the same. Hey, I really want to get advertising. Hey, I really want to have my show monetized. Hey, I want more listeners. That's literally where most podcasts are right now, because the industry is so underdeveloped. And again, for a media source that's been out since 2005, for it to still be underdeveloped 12 years later, it's just like, how, but for podcasting was not a very diverse industry for years. I mean, even if you look at the amount of podcasts now, I believe there are about 350,000 podcasts out there. I don't think that there are more than 2,000 Black podcasts. I don't even know if there are 2,000 Black podcasts.
Well, you know what? I find that so crazy. Maybe because now, when you're immersed in the world, you don't realize how small your island is. Because to me, it's like, oh, we're on this island. Everybody's here. Hey, girl. Hey, what's up? And you don't realize that your island is only 2 miles wide.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just, if you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have even thought about it, because sometimes when you're immersed in it, you don't really realize how small it is. But why do you think that the podcast world has been so underdeveloped, and especially for creators of color?
I don't think that any industry can really grow without diversity, especially in 2017, and for podcasts, if excluding the last 18 months, for podcasts, they were very white, they were very male dominant. And if you are only, targeting essentially white males, that's leaving out a huge section of the country. And if you think about it, in a bigger, in a bigger scale, a huge section of the world. So now, with Black and brown people diving into podcasts now, it's a really cool thing. A lot of, I would say it's underdeveloped on our end, because who would you say are leaders? Who would you say you can go to ask, oh, how do I make my podcast successful? There really aren't too many, so a lot of us are out in this ocean and we're all like paddling and stuff, and some of us have landed on uninhabited islands, and we're trying to build up things and get people to come over and stuff. And that's really where we are now. But if people really take the time to study if they take the time to really study the data, and I know that part is really boring, and I would have to say that college helped me out with that. If you take the time to study the data and go look for the data itself, you can use the last 12 years of podcasting data and statistics to guide how you create podcasts.
Oh my gosh, you just said so many things. I have all these little notes here. All right, first thing, just because you just mentioned it, data. I am so big on people getting into their data. Like, that's why I tell everyone, if you are hosting your if you have a podcast, direct people as much as possible to listen to it via your site, right?
Yes.
Because then you can, and use a hosting platform that allows you those back end statistics. Like I use Libsyn. I used to be on SoundCloud, but it didn't give me the flexibility that I needed. So I'm on Libsyn now, and I try to direct people to my site to listen to it because I connected to Google Analytics, and there's just so much stuff that you can learn. But talk to us about data. Like what kind of data should podcasters or any type of creators be looking for, and where can they find it? And maybe talk about how you've used that to help grow Indie Creative Network.
Yeah. So, great question. Our network started on SoundCloud. What we did for the shows that we helped start, we were the only place that you can actually listen to the shows was on SoundCloud, or with the SoundCloud feed that also led into iTunes and Mixcloud. That gave us 3 different distribution platforms. So first off, know what distribution platforms you want your show to be on, because as long as everything is coming back into your whatever analytical platform you're using, whether it's Google Analytics or SoundCloud Analytics, which is a lot lacking, matter of fact, or Libsyn, for example, if you can make sure that it's all filtering back there, you will be relatively okay. I use data to guide how we come up with our topics. And I also use data, and something that we're about to start doing is going on tours and setting up events that we want to do, because if Indie Creative Network has been out now, officially has been out since January 1st of 2016. So we're a year and 2 and change months.
Yay. We are like birthday buddies. We're like anniversary buddies a little bit.
Hey. So, we use that year, to kind of figure out, to pinpoint, where, make sure people cared about what we were putting out. That was actually really important, because if people didn't care, we wouldn't have invested any money into it. It would have either stayed on SoundCloud until it could have popped some more, or we would have said, everybody, this didn't work out. We might have to retool. But, month over month after month, we were able to study the stats and see that our listenership was going up. People cared more. People came back. Our first day analytics went up. Our 1 week analytics went up, which is basically, for people who may not know, first day analytics is how many people listen to your podcast as soon as it drops. So week analytics, or the 7 days, how many people are listening to it over the 7 days point, or episode to episode. Like most of my podcasts come out every single week. So we would analyze and see, okay, did they check out last week's episode? Did they check out this week's episode? How do we make sure that we're connecting those two? So it's a lot of things to go to data. But yeah, in terms of touring, there are a lot of places where we don't have shows at. Our network is different to some of the other networks that are out, or our platform is different to some of the other platforms that are out, because we have shows in different cities. We actually have 27 shows in 15 cities right now across 5 countries. So what that helps us do, our analytics, what it helps us do is it helps us find out where we should possibly have shows. And if we don't have a show there, if we don't have aspiration to have a show there, maybe we can pull up and, do a live event, because obviously a couple hundred or a couple thousand people listen to our content. So let's make sure that we're giving them what they want. If they live in, Dayton, Ohio, we don't have any shows in the Ohio state. Let's go to Ohio and do a live event and make sure that, those people come out and stuff like that, whatever. Even when it comes down to like Facebook, Instagram and Twitter analytics. Twitter promotional ads. We can target where we want to drop our ads at based on the analytics that we're getting from Google Analytics and getting from SoundCloud and our distribution platform, which is called Pinecast.
You know what? I love that you mentioned that because I think that there's so much that you can learn about your audience just based on diving into that. Because I even know for Dreams and Drive, a lot of my listeners are in LA and Washington, D.C. Like there's more people who are listening in LA and D.C. than the New York City area. And I'm like, what? That like, do I need to go to LA or do I need to go to D.C. or something?
You do. Definitely.
I don't know why. Because I feel like unless you know what, maybe I can even zero down based upon the guests. Since I do it virtually, I can interview people who are all over the country, which has been a benefit. So it's interesting.
It helps and that's one thing that we did, that we were focused on once we opened our studio, which we didn't get into, but we opened a studio in Brooklyn in November of last year. And one of the first things that I did was buy a web camera and hook up Skype because we wanted to make sure that we were able to continue with our mission statement of reaching out and elevating Black and brown voices. And we, even though we have these shows in all of these cities, there are tons of cities across the world that we don't have a show in, that we probably may never have a show in, but there are amazing Black and brown people in those cities that we need to highlight.
Oh, we got to get to that studio. I'm writing that down, so I want to ask you about that. But before then, you said the three things that a lot of your creators on your network wanted was advertising, monetization, and listeners. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about listeners first. Yeah. How do you help creators build their audiences? And can you give some tips for anyone listening in who also wants to build their audience?
Absolutely. So, one of the most important things is SEO, and we talked about that. I mentioned that earlier. SEO is super important. If people can't Google, if people can't randomly stumble onto your show by Googling for it or Googling for podcasts, you already have a problem. So first of all, I want to shout out Barry from Podcasts in Color, because she built the largest Black and brown or people of color registry in the world. And that definitely helps with a lot of people's SEO. But what we did was we set up on our website, we set up individual pages for each podcast that had all their bio information in there, who's actually on the podcast, and of course their podcast picture. Mm-hmm. So what that does is, if someone's looking for a Black podcast in Toronto, Galcast would pop up. Or someone is looking for a business podcast, a Black business podcast in New York, the PLC report will pop up, So we definitely help them from that perspective. What we also did, which I feel like a lot of, this is not their fault, but a lot of podcasts have a problem with this. It's marketing their own content. Because you're creating a show, which is already one job. Well, it's actually like 3 or 4 jobs. You're creating a show, right? Now you have to market it. Like, oh my God, how do you do that? We try to solve the how. So we help people with marketing their content on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, the big three in terms of social media. One of the things that we created, which helps a lot of people, helps us push a lot of people's content, is what I like to dub as Instagraphics. Because I realized when I was posting my show on Instagram that people cared that I interviewed someone new, and if I put their picture on my Instagram, it was like, oh, who is that? But I still wasn't getting enough engagement. And then I tried to add in audio, and that didn't work because people didn't necessarily understand there was audio behind this picture, and a lot of trial and error, So we created these infographics that we do through Photoshop, which kind of has like a moving circle, and it has like a ticker which lets people know this is when it starts, this is when it ends, and it has some of the audio from an episode. So that's something that people can try and do. Definitely try different things to post your content. Also with Twitter, which I think is the best place for podcasts. Twitter, definitely drop quotes. If someone's talking to you for an hour, you definitely have enough quotables for an entire week. If you're using 140 characters, like everyone should be. So posting little quotes that people said, definitely using hashtags, definitely
on Twitter.
On Twitter, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook, because you can actually search a hashtag. And shout out to Barry for teaching me that as well. I always tell, I don't like when people, learn things and don't shout out who taught them that because it came from somewhere. But Barry, I think, she's the godmother of podcasts, but she also is the godmother of hashtags, because you can Google a hashtag and it will pull up everything from Facebook, everything from Instagram, everything from Twitter.
No way.
Yeah, so
I'm
definitely
Google some hashtags tonight.
Push the hashtags like crazy. I actually deleted. I mean, it's an experiment, but I deleted my Twitter page for the POC Report podcast because, and I just now when I'm posting about a new episode or stuff, I just use the hashtag. That makes it easier for me, so I don't have to tweet from 2 different pages, well, 3 different pages. I don't have to tweet from 3 different pages. The episode, I don't have to push all the content from two different accounts. I can push it all from my account using the hashtags. When people engage with it, it's all coming through the hashtag as well. So.
That's some great tips. Great tips. I'm definitely going to be Googling some hashtags tonight. And I found too is like, you really have to understand what your audience likes and see what is, what is gaining traction with them. So for Dreams and Drive on Instagram, for me, I find is where I get a lot of engagement. And what I found was doing quotes. So pulling quotes from the episode and just doing like a quote graphic where I'd have the quote and then I'd have the episode number and the person there. And I thought people would want pretty pictures. People really just want quotes and they want to feel inspired. They just want to have something they could screenshot and that can be in their phone. And I think that goes with my whole mission of Dreams and Drive is people are trying to get that daily motivation, that weekly motivation to keep going. And I even find that I have to even get more specific in the types of quotes. So the ones that are really resonating with people are the ones that are more aspirational and not too technical. So Instagram, I don't get as technical just because people aren't thinking that hard on Instagram. They're scrolling, screenshotting, and moving on. So it's really just about finding your audience and finding out what works for them. But okay, let's get into this really quickly before we go into the studio monetization, because I feel like that's something that's hard for a lot of podcasters, especially podcasters of color who are not big name brands already, which I wanted to mention earlier because I sometimes feel like, I'm not going to name drop here because there are some podcasts that I actually do love that are by people who already had big brands, but it can kind of be unfair when, someone launches a podcast and in 2 weeks they have like 30,000 downloads an episode, right?
Yeah.
And there are other podcasts out there that are legit have better content. You know what I mean? Yeah. So how can somebody who's a small time creator still, build an audience or still have a platform that can be monetized at some point?
So this is a major something I've really been thinking about a lot since I've started this platform. Monetization is very hard, especially for podcasts because it's unproven. It kind of gets a little bit technical, so I'll try and keep it as above board as possible. We're working on very old, and we're working on very old technology. So RSS feeds, which is what most podcasts exist on, or all podcasts exist on, really. People can't tell when someone has listened, when someone hits play. They can't tell how far they've gotten to the episode. They can't tell when that person dropped off, which is actually really important for advertisers because they want to make sure that you heard the ad, right? So a lot of advertisers are very scared of investing money into podcasts because they're not sure that they can get an actual return on investment for that, right? What I would suggest people to do is if they are going to do, if they're going to run ads, whether it's an affiliate or whether it's affiliate links, like how Amazon does, or whether they can garner a partnership with a business, which is something that we actually try to do with small businesses. Run the ad as soon as let me rephrase that. Run the ad Not as soon as the show starts, but definitely within 3 minutes. I actually call it my 3-minute rule. Like, if you're going to do an advertisement, you need to make sure that you intro the show, make sure people are like listening already, and then say, oh yeah, by the way, you know, because people don't like ads. No one likes ads. I hate ads. Right?
We got to make money. We got to make some moolah.
Exactly. But if you can keep it within stream of the episode, you know, whereas it doesn't seem like this is, okay, hey guys, so yeah, we're about to get paid real quick. Let me drop this ad on you. You know, people don't like that ingenuity. That, I'm sure I messed that whole word up, but people don't like that. They don't like that kind of stuff. So we definitely, I always try and tell people, make sure you say your ad within the first 3 minutes, but definitely also make sure that it sounds like you. People like podcasts because of the person that's hosting, whether it's one person or multiple people, they like your voices enough that they come back on a week-to-week basis, or whatever the frequency of your podcast is. So definitely make sure that it's in your voice.
So let's talk about this studio. Why did you guys decide that the studio was the next platform in your journey?
So for 2017, I knew that I wanted to get into visuals because the concept of the network had changed at that point. I realized, so as an entrepreneur, I lived through the blog era. I watched the blog era pop up and die. I watched some people survive that and other people, you know, give up and other people die, you know, and I didn't want to be a part of a dying industry. And I don't want to say jump ship, but I'd rather refocus my attention now than later. So the network, this is kind of how the network got into the whole on-demand aspect of things, because a podcast necessarily is on-demand, but on-demand also opens up us to more like different types of content. So we opened up ICN Studios on November 1st, 2016. It's actually located on Biggie's block in Brooklyn. So I'm really excited about that because I'm from Brooklyn, and shout out to Biggie, you know, but what we wanted to do and what we did eventually do was we got a green screen. And in one of my multiple random talents, I actually understand, I know how to shoot. I used to be a cinematographer, and I also know how to edit video as well. So in the studio, we have one side, which is for audio, for us to record our podcast. And then on the other side, we shoot our visuals. Now, a lot of people be wondering, well, how does that actually tie into podcasts? Well, for Instagram, we have the infographics, so people also like to see your face. You know, it helps people visually see who these podcasters are, visually see who they're listening to on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis or whatever it is. So after our podcasts are done, the ones that actually record in the studio in New York, we have them going from the green screen and, shoot a little commercial like, hey, hi, my name is Wize. On this episode of POC Report, we interviewed so-and-so. And, maybe that person is still there, or whether they did it on Skype or what, just a little commercial so people can actually see that. And then we throw like the logo and stuff in the background on the green screen. And it just looks really, looks really professional, and it looks like it's like the next level essentially of promotion. So, and we can run ads on that on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. So,
and if you put it on YouTube, or is it on YouTube too?
We don't put them on YouTube. Our YouTube, we're actually saving for some things that we're doing later on in the year.
Okay.
But yeah, we haven't put the stuff on YouTube yet. We are actually looking into doing YouTube thing, kind of like doing like a little like YouTube highlight of of episodes. So just kind of grabbing, maybe 15 to 30 second clips of the episode and like putting that compilation together and posting that as like possible promotion material as well. But we're leaving our YouTube generally for like some of the long form stuff we were going to start doing later on this year as well.
Yeah, and I say YouTube just because YouTube is another path for monetization too. If you're able to build a brand that works for YouTube, and YouTube listeners or YouTube subscribers, they are committed and they are dedicated and they are ride or dies. So if you're able to build a consistent YouTube following, then that can also be a very, very viable path for you. But as we wind down, Wize, and I could talk forever forever. I'm like, damn, it's almost an hour since we've been talking. What are some of the challenges that you're facing? Because, building your own network, being an entrepreneur, being a creative is not always peaches and cream. So tell us a little bit about some of the rainy moments and how you're working through those.
Well, some of the rainy moments are when you're trying to explain to a business why they should invest, either why they should invest in your company or why they should run an ad with your company. Because people see podcasts as trendy, it's a little bit harder for them to want to put their technically, I guess, essentially put their brand on your back and say, okay, well, we need you to do this. So can you do it? So that's really hard. And really, if you think about it, I mean, statistically, matter of fact, this actually came out not too long ago from Pew Research Center. Only 24, actually, this is from 2017 now. So 24% of Americans have actually heard of a podcast or listened to a podcast.
Wow.
That's not a lot of people. I mean, it is a lot of people in the grand scheme of things, but it's really not a lot of people. Like, America has 308 million people. Only 24% of them listen to a podcast, and you better hope that they fit into your niche market, and more than likely they're not. So you're really fishing from a pool that's very tiny, So when I go to a small business and say, hey, you should run your ad on our podcast, a lot of the times the question, the secondary question is, what's a podcast? And having that barrier having to explain that to people already is a very high barrier to hop over. So I would say that's definitely one of my major challenges. But challenges that I really face on a day-to-day basis is making sure that I'm accountable to all of my podcasters and all of the admin and all the interns that we have that work with us. Like, this platform has 60 plus Black and brown people on it. I feel personally obligated to each and every one of them to make sure that they're getting everything that they want out of this platform, because they didn't have to be a part of this. So I really work my butt off from morning to night, thinking of different ways to market their content, thinking of different ways to help them get to that next level, thinking of different ways to allow them to leave their job and be able to do this full time, because that is also something that a lot of them want to do. I'm thankful that I've had the opportunity to leave my full-time job to do this full-time, but not everyone has that obligation, and not everyone has those resources to do so. So if I have this time, I want to make sure that I'm utilizing it as efficiently as possible. But a lot of, like, if you look at Serial, for example, right? Biggest podcast, broke all kinds of records, whatever it is. They get millions of listens per episode. Again, wider podcasts have a decade jump on the majority, like 99.9% of Black and brown podcasts, and that's going to make it hard for us to get into that atmosphere. Plus, from a statistical standpoint, I don't remember exactly what percent of white people there are in this country, but there's a lot. There's a lot. It's a huge percent. And there's only a little measly 12% of Black people here in this country. That's 42 million people. That's a huge pocket to reach from. But again, if only 24% of Americans are listening, how many of those are Black and brown people? You don't know. You really don't know. So it's like having to educate people while also trying to tell people, like, I might not get 1 million downloads an episode, or I may not, how long does it take someone to get 50 million listens? Like, oh my gosh, it's just it's so much. It's difficult, and it's difficult, but it's also like heart-wrenching, because you're working so hard on your product and people are just telling you, like, it's not enough. And it's like, but how? And if it's not enough, well, then help me get there. If you like it and you think it's really if you think it's really good, then help me get where I'm trying to get, because clearly this is an underdeveloped market, but there are people who actually care about it. If anyone even looked at Nielsen's Young, Black, and Connected document that dropped, survey essentially that dropped last year, they broke down how many people, like what Black people are looking for in this country in terms of media. Well, it actually broke down in terms of a lot of things, but one of the factors that they focused on was media. And first off, 90% of African Americans in this country have a smartphone. That is the second highest connected demographic in the country, right behind Asian Americans. So if 90 some odd percent of Black people in this country have a smartphone, they already have access to podcasts. It's just a lot of them have iPhones, so a lot of them are on SoundCloud. So their access to podcasts are already there. They just need to find the right ones. And that's kind of why, Indie Creative Network is really important to me, because it's a millennial focused company that specifically speaks to the Black and brown community, the global Black and brown community, the global millennial Black and brown community. And that's 2 billion people, So if you could even get 1% of that, like, you have a massive market now.
Yeah. And I think it's important for us to come together, because then we know what benchmarks are important, right? Because I feel like nobody knows. So what's like the average download for a Black business podcast that focuses on millennials, right? Like, nobody knows, because you can't go to a place and say, all right, here are the standard benchmarks for this. Whereas in other types of media, you can go and get that data. So I think what you're doing at Indie Creative Network is important. And I just think it also calls to what has to be made and what more as creators we need to start thinking about. And I think people need to really, if you're going to make a podcast and you really and this is going to be me throwing shade, I think there's some people who make podcasts just to make it. And there are some people who make podcasts because they actually care about the community, and they care about how podcasts are helping to change people's lives in a lot of ways. So it's just know why you're doing it and try to contribute in some way if possible.
Yeah, like I always tell people, it's so crazy. People come to me asking to join the network, and I'm like, well, for one, it's a curated thing. It's the first thing. So if you may want to be on the listing, but that's not how this works out. The other thing is that they come to me and they say, okay, well, if I can't join, well, what will be a way for me to join? And I always say, well, it needs to fit within our demographic. A, it needs to be millennial focused. B, I need to make sure that you're actually focusing on a specific niche, because no one cares if you can talk about, politics, if you can talk about politics, if you can talk about pop culture, if you can talk about, hip hop, you can talk about EDM, that's too many things. You're focusing on way too many things. Focus on one thing and then become a master of that. That's what podcasts really want. And that's what podcast listeners really want. That's how you really get to grow your fan base. That's the first thing. The other thing is that, each of our shows specifically fits a demographic. And that's what makes Indie Creative Network kind of unique. So we have a show, we brought on a show in Michigan, right? The show in Michigan is called Chai Tea Party. They are 2 women who are Indian American, which is called Desi women. So they are 2 Desi women who live in Michigan, who talk about their experiences in Michigan, and they speak to other Desi women I guess technically in the world, because they do Skype calls as well, right? That's a demographic that we didn't necessarily have, whatever. So if it fits a demographic, sure, we'll bring it on, whatever. Are there shows that we'd love to have on our network, whatever? Some of these pop culture funny shows, absolutely, because some of them have much bigger markets. But with podcasts being so niche focused, the only way the network is going to be able to grow the way that it needs to grow to represent the diaspora, it needs to reflect the diaspora, and if I got 5 shows, and I promise this to all the podcasts when they first started, I would never bring a show on that cannibalizes their own audience, because that's not fair to them, right? But if I have 5 shows that talk about pop culture, and they're all from Black people that live in New York, how are we going to grow? You know, that's the same 5 audiences listen to the same 5 shows, and they're never going to listen to any of the other shows. That's not fair to the network. That's not fair to the podcasters. That's not fair to people who put in the tons of time and effort. Like, oh my gosh.
You know what's crazy that you mentioned that is when I first got featured on iTunes, I don't know if you heard the story, but I basically reached out. I I cold emailed the guy from LinkedIn. I researched who's the head of podcast, sent him an email. We had an email conversation. I premised it as, hey, I just want to tell you about Dreams and Drive. And he basically said to me, he was like, why don't you start a network? And he was like, he thinks the only way and I don't know, maybe he has some kind of background knowledge because he's iTunes podcast. He has that networking, all the background analytics that they don't share. He was like, there needs to be more podcast networks, and the podcasts that grow are the ones that are usually part of networks, especially for people of color. So, hey, I feel like it's all right for there to be more than one network, right? If you're able to come to pull together audiences, and it's kind of like that whole building community, and we're all supporting one another, because that's gonna be what helps us grow, is not thinking that you have to do everything by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't get a chance. I mean, I kind of feel bad, but not really. But I didn't get a chance to highlight the platform that we use. So I wanted to go on Libsyn, but for me to carry all 27 shows to Libsyn, it would have cost me somewhere around $1,200 a month. And I was like,
Jesus.
I was like, psych. You're right. So I found this platform called Pinecast. Pinecast lets me host all 27 podcasts on the network, on their distribution platform, for $50 a month, which is the price that some people pay for one podcast.
Wow.
Right. We can generate as many RSS feeds as we want to add more podcasts to our network. And that has really helped in the growth, because we now have almost a technical person who handles that stuff or whatever. He's based out in Oakland. Now that has helped us grow, because that's not only has that helped us grow from a technical standpoint, but now, we actually have a link. The link in my Twitter bio is the link to, if you click at that, it goes directly to our iTunes page, and it shows all of our podcasts, because we technically have a podcast provider page now for networks.
Oh wow, that's really cool.
So that has helped. Working with them has definitely helped get that off the ground, because before it was we had all these shows, and they had a little graphic in the corner that showed that they were a part of the network, but people weren't correlating the two. He wouldn't see, oh wait, that's Any Creative Network, that's Any Creative Network too. They didn't necessarily get that. My job isn't to beg people to listen to the stuff. My job is to make sure that everyone's stuff is up to par, so that when people do listen, it's top notch, and it's undeniable that this is good content, regardless of what platform it comes from. Because right now my mission is to make sure that Black and brown people get their voices heard. Period. Because I know that there's so much talent. People are surprised that Get Out made $100 million. And I'm like, why? Black people are profitable. There's a lot of stuff.
A lot of us doing a lot of creative things.
Yeah. So it's I'm not surprised from that. And I'm not surprised when any Black and brown person becomes successful, because I know the everything is there. We just don't have the resources. I went to Black Tech Week, about 3 weeks ago now, and at Black Tech Week, all they focused Black Tech Weekend, all they focused on specifically was funding. There were so many gems, so many things in there people just didn't know about. I tried to capture as much visuals and audio as possible to let people know what happened there, because it's so important. But a lot of our issues right now is that there are not enough resources. I come back to Flatbush. I mean, this story still bothers me to this day. Last summer, I moved back to Flatbush after living in Washington Heights in the Bronx for a little while. I moved back to Flatbush, and I say, you know what? Nah. I went to school to build websites for people, or to learn how to build websites, and they were businesses right up the block from me that have been around since I was a baby, or even longer than that don't have websites, that don't have a web presence at all. I said, nah, that's crazy. Let me print off some little pamphlets that tell people, I'll teach them how to build websites, I'll teach them how to get like web knowledge for $10 a class, and the class is an hour long, right? Definitely not a pocket breaker. That might be, one transaction for some of these businesses, right? And I literally walked and went into every single store for about a mile. And I walked on the other side a mile back giving out these pamphlets. No one messaged me. And I'm like, but these are resources that we need, resources that we should have in our community. But sometimes people don't want them, and people don't know what to do with them when they do get them. And that's kind of like, I don't know. One of my flaws is I try to help everybody. Like I try to help everybody, and it's not possible. It's not.
I feel you in that one. I had an idea for that too, of like, going to local businesses. Cause where I live, we have a main street. It's called Main Street. There's a lot of like Caribbean businesses. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of like, immigrant run businesses. And my thing was, maybe I could start an email marketing agency, right? Like, what if the local Jamaican spot sent out coupons once a week to people, or, did highlights to say what soup of the day they were offering? People would come in because I want to know when my fish soup is getting made, because, it's never consistent week to week. And to them, it was just so archaic. So I think it also could be a generational shift of, there's just a lot of older generations who aren't in the millennial age bracket who just don't get it. So I definitely think that there has to be a way that we as millennials can help them get it, because they're still important to our economy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, right? Absolutely.
So you mentioned, I was listening to one of your episodes before we got on, and I don't know if you mentioned it or your co-host. What's your co-host name again?
Colton.
I don't know if I was listening while I was shoveling, so sorry. One of you guys said, podcasts are the soul of society. Do you remember who said that?
That was definitely me.
Okay. So with this whole idea that podcasts are the soul of society, you have Indie Creative Network. What keeps you going when you feel like giving up? What keeps you motivated to put your dreams in drive?
Oh man, there are a lot of motivations that I have. I would say the one that personally touches my soul the most doubles back to my daughter. Mm-hmm. Like I want that when Brianna, at whatever age, that she can remember me at this point. Maybe she's like 7 or 8 when she starts remembering things for real now, right? I want that she knows that we have something that we created that helps the diaspora, the entire Black and brown diaspora. I want that when she wakes up, she sees someone that inspires her the way that my mother inspired me as a young child. I want that when she gets to 18 or 17 and a half or 18 or whatever it is, that she can make the choice of having to go to college or going into the family business. I didn't necessarily have a choice because my family works for other people, so for her, at least she would have the option to do something that she may really have the passion to do, and it not be a forced situation. So Bree.
Yeah, maybe she can go to Google University.
Yeah. Hey, look, man, I feel like I learned a lot of stuff on Google. By the time she's pushing 18, Google University might be like a in-person robot that teaches you stuff. Like, oh man, I love technology, so I'm pretty sure that there will be a lot of technological jumps in the next 13 years. So maybe Google University might be something that should be a part of.
So before we go into the lightning round, I have a quick question for you. All right. Mm-hmm. Is your real name Wize, or is it just a Caribbean nickname that they gave you when you was a little kid and you just got stuck with it?
No, Wize actually is a name that I got 6 years ago, actually. It's a name that a friend of mine, his name, funny enough, is Potential. He gave me that name because I just know a lot of things. I have a lot of individual talents and a lot of the jack of all trade. Like, that's me. And instead of calling me Jack, he called me Wize.
Okay. So let's get into our lightning round. So this part of the interview, Wize, I'm going to give you a prompt and I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind. And remember, this is sticking with our whole dreams and drive metaphor. Okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Park.
Not thinking.
Reverse.
Going backwards.
Neutral.
Focusing.
Drive.
Putting your foot to the gas.
All right. And if you want to be a dream driver, you have to have your keys to success. So Wize, tell me 3 things that every dream driver needs in their toolkit before they hit the road.
For me, in my toolkit, definitely my iPhone. If I didn't have my iPhone, I would be actually, you know, not even just my iPhone. My God, my Apple products. The connectivity definitely helps me. Twitter has made life, and social media in general, but definitely Twitter has made life super easy for me. And support. If without support, you know, where are we?
So where can our dream drivers find you online?
So I am online at The Real Wize, Wize. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. I'm everywhere there. You can find Indie Creative Network at indiecreativenetwork.com. And on social media, they are Indie Creative NW. There we go.
Okay, well, thank you for listening and thank you for being a fan of the show and a supporter. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all your expertise and your insight. And I feel like there was so much more that we could have talked about, but I think this conversation was the one that people needed to hear.
Thank you so much for having me on. And thank you for all those kind words, honestly.
All right. Bye, Wize.
Bye-bye.
All right, so that's a wrap for episode 80 with Wize. I hope that you guys enjoyed hearing his dream driving story as well as his keys to success. Now, there were a lot of takeaways that I had from this episode. What were your favorite things? What really resonated with you? Let us know whether you're on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Find us at Dreams and Drive and share what you learned. Use the hashtag Dreams and Drive as well so that I can go in and see what people are saying and reshare all the good stuff that you guys are mentioning. If you want today's show notes, you can also get the Nielsen Young Black and Connected report there as well. Just go to dreamsanddrive.com and click on episode 80. Now, if you want to join our Dreams and Drive community, that's our online weekly newsletter where you'll get tips and all that good stuff. Just go to dreamsanddrive.com/join. And remember, if you haven't subscribed to us already, whether you're listening on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, we're also now on iHeartRadio. Please hit that subscribe button. I want to make sure that if you enjoyed today's episode, you also enjoy episode 81, 82, and all the ones prior to this one. So go hit that subscribe button. I appreciate you all. I want to just say that sometimes when you're building something, you may not know the impact that you're having on other people, but all the encouragement that you guys give me each week, you know, especially on Instagram or on Twitter when you're sending me messages and sharing your story, that inspires me to keep going because as I said, this has been a dream of mine. I've ridden, I don't know if that's the right word. I've definitely bicycled on many other paths trying to find my way to podcasting. And I really feel like podcasting is something and a place where I'll really prosper and thrive. So thank you all for believing in me. I believe in each and every one of you. Keep dreaming, keep driving, and we'll chat again in episode 81.